Order. Order. Well, welcome everybody to the latest meeting of the Environmental Audit Committee. Delighted to be joined by the Secretary of State for DEFRA, Steve Reid. Thank you very much, Secretary of State, for joining us, and also your colleagues, Ms Randall and Mr Hill. The questions that we ask will primarily be to the Secretary of State, but obviously if he wants to bring in and ask for further clarification from colleagues, he's absolutely fine to do so. In opening the meeting, if I can just say that we've had significant public interest in the meeting, and a number of submissions to the committee have been received. Unfortunately, there won't be time to cover in detail every single issue that has been raised with us, and therefore it's likely the committee will wish to follow up a number of issues in writing after the meeting to the Secretary of State. So if I could start firstly by welcoming you, Secretary of State, and invite you to introduce yourself and the colleagues that are with us and their areas of responsibility.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here before the massed ranks of the EAC. When I appeared before the DEFRA Select Committee, I failed to bring in my colleagues, so I'm going to make a bit more effort to bring them in, and their knowledge of the detail inevitably will be better than mine. I'm Secretary of State for DEFRA. Sally?
I'm Sally Randall. I'm Director General Environment in DEFRA.
David Hill. I'm Director General Strategy and Water in DEFRA.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much. Well, Secretary of State, you've been in post since the election of the new government in what can only be described as a challenging period for your department. How are you enjoying life in government? How do you reflect on these your opening salvos in the post?
Compared to opposition, it's fantastic.
Is it easy as it looks?
It's not easy. It's not meant to be easy. You know, it's a tough job. Being part of the government of the country, it's a tough job being an MP as well at the best of times, and times are challenging, as you say. But I think we've made a decent start, if I'm honest. We've outlined our 5 priorities for the department to try and focus them on the areas where the public are most concerned about, and where we think we can start to make impact. The most significant of those for the public being water. And water quality was a very big issue in the general election and remains a very high priority for the public. We're making headway on developing a circular economy. I think that's very important for economic growth, but also helping to meet our net zero targets and supporting business to become more profitable, which they will be, if we can help deliver lower cost inputs that don't have to be transported halfway around the world. Food and food security, always going to be very, very significant, and we're working with the farming sector to take them, develop with them a roadmap to transform the sector to become more profitable and therefore more successful for the future. Nature and nature restoration. Nature's been in decline for far too long in this country, and it's important the government pulls every lever that we can to help to restore nature, while balancing that against the imperative of delivering growth, which is the shared mission of everybody who is a part of the government. And the 5th priority we have is around flooding. We inherited flood defences that were in the worst condition on record, and we have been looking at how we can target the additional funding that we secured in the budget to help to improve that, but also we need to focus a lot more on maintenance because of the state of disrepair, and we want to protect more areas from the dangers of flooding that are a huge concern to I think it's 1 in 6 homes in this country are at risk of flooding, and the many, many businesses that are at risk of flooding.
Thank you. I mean, I'd like to start by focusing around nature and the Environment Act targets that you've inherited and have taken forward. A recent report of the Office for Environmental Protection came out. Can you tell us how important you consider that report of the OEP to be, and the functions of the OEP?
Yeah, well, the OEP is a very important organisation. It holds the government to account on our delivery of the Environment Act targets, but that includes the EIP. They're a very useful source of advice as well. The criticism is constructive. I've had a very good relationship with Dame Glenys and the team that she leads at the OEP, and I welcome always the interventions they make when they make them, and the advice that they give at other times is very helpful too. I'm sure you're going to come on to the EIP a little more, but they have of course made comments about that, and I share their concerns because the EIP we inherited didn't have delivery plans attached to the targets, and if you don't attach delivery plans, you're not going to meet them. So we've been working with the sector to attach those. In terms of the annual progress report, the statutory requirement is that we will respond by January 2026. I would like to do it sooner than that, if we can. It would make sense to me to perhaps coincide a response to the OEP with the refreshed EIP when we're able to publish that. The delay, I commissioned a rapid review of the EIP much as soon as we were elected into office. Doesn't feel so rapid now because we're 9 months on and haven't been able to publish it yet, but that is for the very sensible reason that we need to wait for the outcome of the spending review so I know what resources I can allocate to those delivery plans. I don't want to put something out in public that I'm not confident we can deliver. So once the spending review is completed in early June, we will finalise the EIP refresh. We'll publish that. That seems to me like a good time to issue our response to the OEP, because then I can add more detail in.
Okay, well, going back to the OEP, and we share your view of its importance. Dame Glenys was in front of us and speaking about the challenges that had been faced, the very serious risk that currently the government is not on track to hit any of the targets, with the legally binding targets within the Environment Act. I mean, given the importance of the OEP and the importance of getting its findings taken seriously, can I ask you why there was no oral statement to Parliament on the publication of the OEP report?
Yes, I remember we spoke about that at the time.
We certainly did.
We did, offline. I mean, first of all, there wasn't a requirement on us to do that. We did a written statement, but I think we can provide more information when we have the full response to the OEP, which we won't have until the matters I mentioned earlier on have been completed. But I hope neither you nor the committee will take that as any lack of interest or even serious consideration of what the OEP had to say. I think we had, I can't remember the exact things that were going on that week, but I think we had something else going on.
Well, can I say, Secretary of State, this is part of a pattern. There was no statement on the OEP report, which we were disappointed about. The Secretary of State for DESNA has made a report on COP29. We have no statement from your department on COP16. When we had your colleague Mary Craig here, she suggested there hadn't been a statement on COP16 because it was only half time, and maybe get one after the second half in Rome. There was no statement then. Now, as your job is to promote the importance of your department, of these issues across government, then it isn't missing out on all of these opportunities to actually get these issues in front of Parliament a bit of a funny way of going about it.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with you on that. I think we have quite a lot of statements and UQs covering my department. We've had a few recently on water.
With respect, UQs are a sign you haven't done a statement on something Parliament thinks is important.
We have more statements than UQs, but we've done them on water, on farming, on flooding. All of those have impacts on nature. Of course, we have orals regularly. We're often part of debates in the Chamber and in Westminster Hall as well. So I don't feel we're hiding nature's light under a bushel.
I think in fairness, if you're getting called to UQs, if you're getting called to Westminster Hall, that's backbenchers saying we think these issues are important, which is great. But statements are your opportunity to say this is important. And actually, with the greatest respect, on a number of cases that I've mentioned there, your department aren't doing that. Now, this committee is right behind you, going out there into government saying this really matters, but you need to pull your weight. Can we have an assurance going forward that at set-piece moments like an annual report from the OEP, which is of incredible importance, that you will take the steps of getting it in front of Parliament?
Well, I certainly don't think we're not pulling our weight. I think we've done an awful lot to move this agenda forwards and to reverse the pretty parlous state that government policy on nature was in, and certainly delivery attached to nature was in following the general election. I take your point. There's going to be differences of view as to when a statement is appropriate or not appropriate, but I certainly hear what you've got to say. And when we respond to the OEP in more detail, that will be perhaps a more appropriate time to consider that.
Well, turning to the report, what do you see as the key lessons from that report?
Well, there's quite a lot that came out of the report that we had from the OEP, and we will be giving them a full response to that. I mean, part of it would be better coordinating across government and with stakeholders. Part of what they were reporting on was the period before we were elected. So, I share many of their criticisms and many of the things and measures and approaches we've been putting in place since the general election are to address some of the points that they raise. So, again, I'll have more evidence of the impact of that later in the year when we're able to give them a response. But for me, that was a very important part of what they had to say. The fact that the EIP didn't have delivery plans attached to it that were resourced with anybody named responsible for delivering those targets. I mean, they weren't so much targets as pipe dreams.
We'll come back onto the EIP shortly, but just sticking with that report, I'm grateful for what you've said about the timeliness. The OEP report for 22-23 was based on the current situation up to March 23. The OEP then produced their report in January 24. Yeah. The government did then, notwithstanding what you said about it being a report on the previous government and you having a well-developed narrative on that performance already coming in, it did take this government until January 2025 to report on that. So we then have a report or a response to a report that is almost 2 years out of date. I'm grateful for what you've said about the 2026 report being brought forward, but do you agree with me that that's a pretty inadequate response to what is, the canary in the coal mine, saying the government's currently on target to miss all those EA objectives?
Well, I mean, I share their diagnosis of the failings of the previous government, to be honest, and I'll have made many of those same points myself. Of various.
Can you make them a bit quicker next time then?
I'll tell you what. I don't think it's helpful for me to just add my voice to criticisms. We're not the opposition now. We're the government. I want to point to what we're doing, and by the time we are in a position to write, and as I say, I want to do it earlier than we're required to do. I want there to be more substantive information about what this government is doing in allocating resources and responsibilities to those targets. So this committee, and just as importantly, members of the public outside, can see that this government has a plan to deliver where the previous one didn't.
Yeah, I mean, with respect, I'm not asking you to comment on it. I'm asking you, and your report, your response in 2025 is pertaining to what the government's going to do to address those things. So I agree with you that we're wanting actions, not words. Now, since it was established, the OEP has had a cap imposed upon its recruitment and is currently smaller than was originally proposed during its creation. Do you intend to ensure that it's better resourced to do its important work coming out of the spending review, even though that could sometimes be difficult for government?
I can't anticipate what will or won't come out of the spending review, but it's no secret to anybody the very difficult financial circumstances this government inherited, and the difficulty in finding resources to increase funding until we've secured growth in the economy. So as things stand, current business planning, we're looking at flat cash for the OEP, as for other parts of DEFRA, and they, like the rest of us, will all have to do better with less. And I think we owe that to the public, because we certainly can't be looking to increase taxes on the public at a time like this, and nor, I think, would the public want to see us cutting matters that for them are right at the top of the agenda, like cutting NHS waiting lists. So it's a very difficult situation. We'll of course keep it under review. I will be in close engagement with Dame Glenys and her team to make sure they have the resources they need to complete the work that needs to be carried out. But the whole of government is currently looking for greater efficiency, not increased spending.
Okay, thank you very much. Barry Gardner.
Yeah, I think Dame Glenys has already told this committee that she doesn't have the resources that she would like. But look, I wanted
She's
to...
a good chief of her organisation.
She is, but she's also very prudent in the way in which she's marshalled her resources, I think, in all credit to her. I was interested in what you said about the rapid review, Secretary of State. The rapid review that you conducted, and you said that there wouldn't be any point in publishing the rapid review until we had the spring statement. Now, as you say, the rapid review it's less rapid now because you'd completed it in January but kept it under wraps. But we do know, because of the Freedom of Information Act that has been secured, that much of the goals that were in the EIP are not going to be achieved in time and to plan. I don't think it's a great surprise to you or anybody on this committee. So, given the spring statement is coming up, are you going to lower the targets, or are you going to extend the timetable to achieve them?
Well, I'm not going to make the same mistake I made at the DEFRA committee and not bring my colleagues in. So I'll just give them some notice after I've answered your question. If they have anything to add to it, then that you'd be most welcome. And you'll appreciate, I'm sure, I can't anticipate what we're going to.
We've got limited time, so I'm wanting. I'm not seeking a detailed breakdown of the budget. What I want to understand simply is you have two options. One is to extend the time period. The other is to lower the target. And it's important for this committee to understand what we are judging you in doing.
Well, I mean, we also want to rationalise the targets as well, to make sure that they are all deliverable and should be in there. So we've been working not on our own. We've been taking an approach based on co-production with the ENGOs in particular, but other stakeholders as well, in looking at the review of the EIP, and all of that will feed through into it. Of course, the approaches you've just described may well affect some of those targets if we want to make them tangible and hard and deliverable. You'll probably see an element of both of that in the targets, but not for all of them. And through the work that we're doing, some of the targets may be different. But I think it's better to have targets that we know are achievable than targets that are not achievable. But I want the EIP to genuinely be a document that guides action and decision making in a way that you will recognise, as I do, that up until now, sadly, because of the potential importance of it, it hasn't been able to deliver.
Isn't it more important to have targets that are in accordance with the science, rather than to say, well, we have the resources to achieve X, Y, or Z? Isn't it more important to actually say, this is what needs to be done?
Absolutely, and that's why we've been co-producing it, as I say, with the ENGOs and other stakeholders. You know, if you're looking around at the people who have the best experience of what's going on to nature and the environment, they're right up there with them, and they have very important views, and I wanted to make sure that they were fully involved.
Well, of course, many of your colleagues in the department were the ones who set the previous targets and advised government on so doing. I don't want to pursue this any further, because what I do want to ask you is a few fishy questions.
Okay.
To start off with, the MPAs, the Marine Protected Areas. You said you would publish stage 3 and 4 of the Marine Management Organisation's offshore MPA process by the end of last year. Yep. We're now at the end of March this year. When are we going to see our MPAs actually being protected from trawling, from dredging, from gravel extraction? Most members of the public say, oh, it's a protected area. Mm-hmm. That means it's protected. You and I know it doesn't mean that at all until we get stage 3 and 4 actually in there.
That's right. And we've been doing work on that with other departments, particularly DESNES as well. But I'm going to defer to my colleague.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary of State. So you're right that in order to make a marine protected area protected, we go through a process of working out appropriate bylaws to protect the particular features, and because each area is different, those are different in different places. So there is a process to go through which has taken a bit longer than we would have liked in some areas. About 60% of our marine protected areas do have restrictions in place, and the rest of them we are working through that process to put those in place. In some cases that
Not of the most damaging activities.
Well, in some cases that will include restrictions to bottom trawling depending on the habitat that's in there. And we are working through those. 2 at the moment, and we're working through those in the
out
remaining
of what,
areas.
360 supposed MPAs?
Yeah. And we've restated our commitment to 30 by 30 as well. So we recognise the importance of the MPAs in achieving those targets.
Well, I think the sooner we can have a timeline on that, because you did say it would be done by the end of last year, the better. On enforcement, the landing obligation, this is essential for data setting catch quotas, but we all know it's not being observed. The MMO has recorded 32 instances of non-compliance, which is a fraction of what's actually not being complied with, and yet there hasn't been a single court action taken against the people who are not complying. Time and again, we hear from the OEP, we hear from everybody else, that the problem is a lack of enforcement. It's not a lack of the regulation, it's a lack of enforcement. So why can't we get on and ensure that the landing obligation is being maintained? It is absolutely essential if you want sound science and decent data.
Do you want me to come on that? Yes, actually. So we do absolutely support the MMO to take enforcement action where necessary. It is also advice is also an appropriate enforcement mechanism in some cases. So it's not always the case that every action needs to lead to prosecution or a punitive enforcement measure. But with
none of them have. I mean, we've got the figures for those who've had a slap on the wrist. We know that. But actually, not a single one has gone to court. Now, you know the economic benefit to a fishing vessel for not landing its bycatch. It is enormous, right?
Yeah, we would.
So there should be a concomitant penalty, should there not?
Yeah, we would recognise that and absolutely agree that there is more that we can do, as in some of our other sectors, to make sure that enforcement leads to economically appropriate penalties where they can. And I think one of the things we'll probably come on to later is that Secretary of State has commissioned Dan Corrie to look at the effectiveness of all of our regulators to make sure that the limited resources that they have can be most appropriately targeted at the most damaging activity.
Could you write to the committee when the first court case is taken against a vessel for non-compliance with the landing obligation? That will alert us to the fact that actually you're on the case. Okay. On implementation of the remote electronic monitoring that would put cameras on board vessels to check bycatch and landing obligation. So far, one vessel has signed up. You implemented the process for mandatory onboard remote electronic monitoring last summer. Why haven't you enforced? It's supposed to be mandatory. Why haven't you? It's not in any of the over 24 vessels. It's not in the over 10 fleet. What's going on? You set these things and then you don't do them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to get you a written response to that one as well.
Okay.
As Sally just said, we are looking at our regulators across the piece, and we'll have more to say when we've been able to complete that piece of work. But on the specifics you've raised there, we'll write back to you.
Okay, thank you. We've got the UN Ocean Conference approaching in June 25 this year. We need 60 countries to ratify. I think 18 have so far. We are not one of them. Yet we like to think that we're taking leadership on the global oceans. Can you give us a specific date for ratification? And I do understand that you're trying to make sure that when you ratify something, you can actually implement it. Very sound policy.
Yes.
But as we see, often it doesn't get there, and we do need some leadership on this because time's getting short.
Well, I'm very, very sympathetic to what you've said then, and you may have pressed my colleagues on the same point. I know you've had Mary Cray, Minister Cray here as well. We will be making an announcement in due course. It's difficult for me to go further than that, Barry, but I'm very sympathetic to the points you've made.
Finally,
and I know that we need for a greater international leadership on this issue, as indeed on other nature-based issues as well.
Look, the EIP is going to be refreshed. I'm just trying to get the staging now and the timing of things. If you're refreshing the EIP this year, when do you intend to make proposals for the next one? Is that going to be in 2028, or will there be a fresh EIP in this year, which then gives you the 5-year process to 2030, which then combines with our 30 by 30 commitments to deliver by then? So it's just trying to see how you're maybe shifting the timescales here, and it may make perfect sense to do so.
I think it makes more sense to publish the refreshed EIP with resources, delivery plans and responsibilities, and then have that as the plan for the next 5 years, taking us to 2030, just so that the whole sector has certainty about what we're working towards and how we intend to get there, rather than at some point along the way having another change.
No, I understand. It was just clarity I wanted, and I think it's very sensible planning. Will each goal in the new plan have a clear apex target? One of the things that was criticised by Dame Glenys in the...
Well, we've heard the concerns raised by the OEP. I shared many of those concerns. The work isn't finalised yet, so hopefully by the time I next appear before your committee, you'll have a copy of it in your hand, so you'll know the answer to that question. You'll be able to hold me and my colleagues to account on delivering it.
Not all the other ones.
Of course you have. If anyone was going to have it, it'd be you, Barry.
Thank you. Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary of State. I was interested in the notion that you want to set targets that are achievable. I come from a business background where we set stretch targets in order to create step changes. Yeah. Do you want to just elaborate quickly on why you're setting or a target that you think will already be achievable?
You mean on the EIP?
Yeah, coming back to the EIP.
No, they're stretch targets, but I want them to be reachable. What we inherited was an EIP that was full of targets, that had nobody responsible for delivering them, no resources allocated to them, and no delivery plan. And I know from my business background as well that if you have targets like that, they're not targets at all, they're mirages. So what I want to do is put in place, they will be very stretching targets. If we're going to meet 30 by 30, that is hugely stretching. I'm sure they'll be questioned in many quarters as well, but I want to know that we are pushing the whole of government, and it's not just DEFRA, of course, to work towards achieving the outcomes which we want, which is nature in recovery after decades in which it's been going into reverse.
Thank you. And so, obviously, I know you're waiting to see what resources are available to you, but based on your knowledge at the moment, to what extent do you think securing a successful settlement in the spending review is going to be absolutely contingent? Is your plan going to be completely contingent upon that?
Well, resourcing will be a key element of our ability to deliver on those targets, but I'm not going to speculate about what will or won't be in the spending review, not least because the decisions haven't been taken yet. I will make my case, as will colleagues in other parts of government. It's not just me as Secretary of State who has an interest in this. Many of my colleagues do as well. You know, the targets in there will help us to achieve, for instance, our net zero objectives. So colleagues responsible for that area will have an interest too. But I do want to put out there stretching targets that are deliverable rather than targets that nobody believes we have a hope in hell of ever achieving. And that was our starting point from what we inherited, which was very unfortunate given the importance of it. Do you want to have any comments on that?
Well, I was just going to add on, if I may, on the point about the spending review. The spending review obviously is a very important moment in terms of the public finance resources that will be allocated for, broadly speaking, the remainder of the Parliament. But the delivery of the targets will depend on more than just public finance. So we've got some important action underway around leveraging green private finance, for example. Initiatives like biodiversity net gain have just been introduced. That will raise anywhere between 180 to approaching a quarter of a billion a year, we estimate. That's a really important revenue stream to support action on the biodiversity targets. So the work we're doing, absolutely, the spending review is important, but it's also about other means of achieving the targets, including private finance, regulation, other action as well.
Thank you. And the EIP is a strategy which engages the whole of government.
Yeah.
How will DEFRA use the refresh to get cross-departmental engagement with the refresh plan?
Well, there is a board that pulls together all the departments and focuses them on delivery of that. That will remain. I mean, that becomes a much more purposeful group when there are resources and delivery plans and responsibilities attached to the targets. But we're very aware of the importance of this across government. It's not for one department, it's for the whole of government. We're the lead on it, and we convene the board, but that's a key way to ensure that it happens. It's not just the board either, it's stakeholders beyond government.
Is there anything else from your colleagues on that?
I mean, there's plenty of examples in the, if you look in our statutory targets at the moment, where either we are delivering through those for other departments' objectives, like health objectives on air quality, or where measures taken across the rest of government, like, for example, on cleaning up vehicles, contributes to our targets, again, in air quality. So we do need to be absolutely kind of knitted together with other departments. An EIP that has a stronger delivery plan underneath it will, as Secretary of State said, make that a very kind of practical and business-like exercise as we take that forward with our colleagues around government.
Yeah, and we've got the Environmental Principles Policy Statement as well, EPPS, which places a duty on all ministers to take decisions in line with those principles. My colleague Mary Cray, the Minister for Nature, is leading work engaging with other government departments as well to make sure that everybody is aligned up towards the same outcome. And you can see some evidence of cross-departmental, cross-government working with. I think we've got the Planning and Infrastructure Bill going through today, haven't we? But the Nature Restoration Fund that is part of that is an example of the whole government coming to get together and looking at how we can, yes, deliver the growth, the economic growth that we need, but also help nature to recover in the way that up until now has not been the case.
Yeah, the only other thing, if I may, that I might add is we did some work with the Treasury in preparation for this spending review, so that all departments, when they put forward their spending review submissions to the Treasury, they need to set out the environmental implications of the spending measures that they're proposing, just as they need to do for their climate change measures. So one of the things we've tried to do in partnership with the Treasury is make sure that in that kind of wiring of how big investment decisions are taken across government, that the environmental factors are always to the fore.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pippa Halings.
Thank you very much. And you've mentioned how important it is to have this joined up planning, and with us being the Environment Audit Committee, obviously we're looking across departmental about how they're fulfilling all those environmental principles, and there are tools that are key to that, and one of those is the much awaited land use framework, and it was really good for many people to see that that is out for consultation. So I have a couple of questions around that. So the first would be, when do you think the results of the consultation, the land use framework consultation, will be presented and published? And then secondly, on the back of that, how do you think the implementation of this, which is looking at how you can manage conflict between different land uses, how will that help deliver on some of the key priorities across your remit, which would be carbon emissions reduction, as you said, nature, infrastructure, and food security? How do you think it will work in practice?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm really pleased that you welcome the land use framework. I think that was a very significant announcement and would be a key set of tools to help landowners and government take the right decisions for how we use our land. We have a limited amount of land for the size of our population and the many demands that we make of that land for development, for energy, for food production and for nature restoration. Currently we have a randomised approach to taking decisions, which means that we are not optimising the way that we need to use that land. The land use framework gives us a set of principles, data and tools that will support decision making, not through compulsion, but by just giving the landowners better information to guide their decision making. And of course government has levers of its own, and it will inform the development of those levers so that we can support outcomes that will be in line with what the public wants to see. The consultation on it is running until July. I don't have a date for when that will be published unless one of my colleagues has got one.
No, I think the consultation closed a bit sooner than that. I think it might be the end of April. But we've just said I think we're expecting a huge response. Actually, we've already had a huge engagement, so we'll need a little bit of time to process all of that. And I think we're just saying later this year.
Later this year.
Would,
okay?
Later this year.
Yeah.
Are you looking at that being in conjunction with other spatial frameworks, such as the spatial energy?
Yes.
So hopefully you're looking at the timing of this being...
Well, the National Planning Policy Framework and the clean energy infrastructure as well. I mean, that's all part of making use of the land, so it would be crazy to have 3 spatial strategies that didn't interrelate, so they will all interrelate. And the departments are talking to each other to make sure that they effectively toggle so that information remains consistent across all of decision making relating to the use of land.
So the spatial and strategic energy plan is coming much later, isn't it? So hopefully we would see that integration happening. But how do you think the delivery, once we get the results of this, so you say it's not prescriptive, it's not going to be using any compulsory, but what levers I would hope we could hear some material weight for planning and house building. Would that be used for local plans, for example? Or secondly, we would look at energy infrastructure, so large-scale solar farms, for example, are looking at, is this a challenge to food security, nature and energy? In what ways will those levers actually be able to be informed by the
Well, I mean, the ones that you've just referred to are probably some of the biggest there. So local plans will be taking this information and it will inform decisions that they place into their local frameworks. And when we're looking at where do we need to put the housing, where do we need to put the new data centres or gigafactories, what is the water supply to those areas, what is the energy supply
in planning terms? So many of us have been in planning committees, so you have to look, there are different levels of weight, aren't there?
That's right.
So so you see it having some level of material weight in
we'll need some level of material weight, but there's a consultation underway, and I shouldn't anticipate with my own views what the outcome of that will be. We want to hear from the people that we've invited to participate, and we'll get that within weeks. But the intention is that by making this additional data available, landowners, applicants in the case of planning, will have much better information to inform their decisions, and then decision makers will be able to apply the range of outcomes they want for their locality, their region or nationally, so that we can make sure that we are optimising the use of land in a way that we haven't done currently.
If that's at sort of planning level, at the national strategic infrastructure, which a lot of the large-scale solar farms, which are controversial in areas where people are trying to look at, actually, does it need to be this scale? Does it need to be in this place? Right. Do you see the land use framework, even before the spatial energy plan coming forward, do you see this as informing even some of those strategic infrastructure
Absolutely.
decisions?
I mean, it'll identify land that will be most appropriate for solar, where it doesn't, for instance, damage food production in our most productive agricultural land. And with that better information available, then better decisions can be taken. So yes, I absolutely envisage it doing that.
Thank you. And the second question would be around the carbon budget. So again, linking in with the 7th carbon budget that the Committee on Climate Change has produced, it's shown optimistically that we can achieve, our net zero targets. But it says, we have to work very hard because by 2040, the second largest emitter will be land use and agriculture. So those are key within your remit, which means because of the lag in those kind of activities, they need to start now. Yeah. What resources or implementation plans do you have in place to start dealing with that now? We're looking at peatland as well as tree planting or other things.
I mean, well, there's a lot of ways that we're giving advice to farmers, and we're maintaining that. But we have the environmental land management schemes as well. We're working with the sector. I made some announcements earlier this year about a farming roadmap to support the entire sector to transition to models of food production and farming that are more environmentally sustainable, but importantly are also more financially sustainable, because large parts of the farming sector is not profitable. So you've got people who are farmers who are putting in all the hours God sends and making very little money at the end of it. So the roadmap will be designed to support farmers to become more profitable into the future, and that might, for instance, result in fewer inputs in terms of artificial fertilizer or the use of pesticides, two of the most expensive inputs that farmers use. By farming in a way that is more nature positive, less of that will mean less runoff, less damage to the environment as well, and all other things being equal, profits for farmers increasing. So I think there's a lot we can do to encourage profitability and sustainability financially as well as environmentally in the farming sector, and we need to work with the sector to achieve those outcomes, which is why we've told the sector we will work with them collaboratively to develop that roadmap for a fair transition.
Thank you very much. John Whitby.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, the latest OEP report showed slowing progress on EIP air quality targets despite some previous advances. We're going to miss the NO2 target, according to the report. Yeah. What do we need to do to get back on track with this, and how is DEFRA working with other departments and industry to turn the curve?
Yeah, well, again, when we publish the refreshed EIP, this is going to be a significant part of it. And I share the criticisms of the fact that not enough was done under the previous government, which is what the OEP was referring to, on air quality. So in the work that we're doing to refresh it, you'll have a much clearer sense of what we intend to do afterwards. The air quality strategy review is due by mid-2028, but obviously you'll get the EIP way in advance of that, so we'll have more to say at that point. Other areas where we've been looking at recently on air quality, Greater Manchester, the clean air plan that they have, we've backed. £86 million now going towards an emissions-free bus fleet, which will make a considerable difference to that area. Also funding changes in the taxi fleet as well. I think that's a really innovative and different approach that Greater Manchester are taking, that we're watching closely, and I think they'll be learning from that may be applicable elsewhere. We're currently assessing proposals from Stoke and Newcastle under Lyme, which are two other areas where we have considerable concerns about that we know we need to work on. We're also evaluating options on PM 2.5. That's a significant cause, as you know, of deteriorations in air quality, but we'll evaluate the options and then we'll come back to you with a detail in due course. Do any of my colleagues have anything to add on that, Sally?
No, I think you've covered the main things that are going on there. As Secretary of State says, the big headlines will be set out in the EIP review. We continue to work with the local authorities that we're working with under the NO2 programme and hope to get final plans in place soon. And of course, we're working as well on the public understanding of air quality risks, and recently published our work on that and how we can make sure that people who are most affected by instances of poor air quality have the information that they need so they can make the right judgments for their own health on those days.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, people in my constituency are well aware of the risks, I'm afraid. How will or how is air quality enforcement being achieved now that we've left the European Union?
How is air quality being achieved now?
Enforcement, yeah.
Well, we're having a piece of work looking at regulation as well. So I can't make the announcements on that because we're still assessing that. But that'll be in a matter of weeks. We'll have more to say on that. But as I say, we're reviewing the EIP targets. That'll give you a lot more data. Just to clarify, it's the EIP targets, not the EA targets that we're amending. We're not changing legislation. It's the Environmental Improvement Plan targets that I'm talking about, just in case there was a lack of clarity.
And talking of the EU, are we considering following them by increasing our targets for NO2 and PM2.5? And if not, how can we encourage government to raise air quality standards, or how can you encourage?
Again, I shouldn't anticipate, because it's not yet drafted, what will be in the EIP review, but you'll get much greater clarity around that. Obviously, we're not bound by what the EU is doing, but of course we'll look at what decisions they're taking to see whether there's anything there that we wish to learn from. But this government and this country will set our own EIP, and it will have appropriate action plans and resourcing attached to it.
Okay, and I mean, you may have partly answered this one, but Department of Transport and the Department for Health have promised a new air quality strategy, and DEFRA is the lead department for that. What progress has been made, and will the strategy include funding for local authority measures?
Yes, we're working with those two departments on the air quality strategy, but again, until it's announced, I can't announce the resourcing, the funding in particular that will go with it, because I'd be in deep trouble with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And it's only right in any case until we have the spending review. We can't know for sure, but certainly there will be resourcing attached to the strategy.
Okay. Perhaps it's just worth...
Sorry.
I was just going to add, in terms of joint work with the Department for Transport, that's one department we actually have a dedicated joint unit between DEFRA and the Department for Transport, completely integrated team, jointly working on the NO2 plan with all of the localities that the Secretary of State mentioned. So it's an example of where we've actually made a machinery of government change to make that happen.
Yeah, and the new Secretary of State for Transport and I were engaging directly with the Mayor of Greater Manchester over their clean air plan as well. So there is real, genuinely close working going on across our departments on that.
Thank you. Helen Dallimore.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, I want to ask about the broken water system, and particularly as it relates to water quality and the impact on the environment. We all know well the issues here and the impact it's had on many communities up and down our country, seaside communities, but also those communities like the Lake District. What I wanted to ask about is, obviously much of these issues come from a completely failing and broken system, not enough money going into infrastructure that is decades, in some cases even longer old. What's the plan to fix it?
Yeah, well, I've been to Hastings and I've seen for myself some of the problems there, and listened to the views of residents and business, furious that the state of our water and sewage system and water infrastructure has got into, and the government's taken a lot of action over that already. The Water Special Measures Act, as it now is, received royal assent a couple of months ago, I think it is by now. That gives the regulator more power to take action against water companies that are in breach. It gives them the power to ban unjustified bonuses to water bosses who are awarding themselves multi-million-pound bonuses while overseeing what their customers would see as catastrophic failure, and that really did offend against people's sense of fairness. So I think it's good we've been able to take steps like that. Of course, we need to go much further. So I've asked Sir John Cunliffe to lead an independent water commission, which is now in full swing, with the call for evidence now open until towards the end of April. Sir John will provide me with a report in June. That will be then subject to a wider public consultation, but the intention is that will provide the basis for further legislation to reform and reset the whole water sector, particularly the regulations, and looking also at the regulator to make sure it's fit for purpose. And clearly it isn't fit for purpose right now because it's not serving the interests of customers, the environment or investors at the moment. So it certainly needs that reset, and I'm looking forward to the work Sir John Cunliffe will be providing further down the line. We've also secured, as the conclusion of the price review 24 period, £104 billion of private sector investment that over 5 years, starting from the 1st of April, will significantly transform water infrastructure. That will lead to a visible and dramatic reduction in sewage pouring into our waterways, but it also means we can start to build the infrastructure that is so sorely lacking and that is constraining and holding back economic growth. A lack of sewerage infrastructure is holding back growth around Oxford. A lack of clean drinking water infrastructure is holding back growth around Cambridge. We can't build the data centres and gigafactories that we need because they have very high demand for water without improving water infrastructure that can guarantee those supplies. And as things stand, by the mid-2030s, demand for clean drinking water will start to outstrip supply, and some parts of the country would then be looking at rationing drinking water. We can't allow that to happen, and yet that's what we've been left with. But the investment that's now coming forward means that we can start to build the infrastructure to avoid those things, start to clean up our waterways, and start to give customers, including those in your constituency, greater reassurance about the state of their water supply.
And just on the point about Ofwat, I mean, we've been calling in the water bosses one by one on the DEFRA Select Committee, and there's a lot of takeaways from that we will be feeding into the Water Commission for DEFRA's perusal. But on Ofwat itself, what our evidence has shown from Ofwat and from the other companies is that it seems to be more process-driven than outcome-driven. Yeah. So you're confirming that definitely Ofwat, the role of Ofwat, whether it has the teeth to properly do its job, mindful that some of its powers have, of course, increased with the Water Special Measures Bill, but even so, that future of Ofwat is in the scope of the Water Commission.
Well, I asked Sir John, and he's published the remit for his work, but to look at regulation and the regulator and other factors affecting the success of the water sector and water infrastructure. So he's looking at that. I mean, I won't speculate on what he might propose. That's for him. Genuinely working fully independently and supported by a team of advisors from a whole range of backgrounds, customers, environmental NGOs, investors and others, but certainly it's in scope.
And on the point around increasing fines, which is coming with the Water Special Measures Act, we heard recently that the Water Restoration Fund will go towards environmental improvement projects. Can you talk a bit about that for the committee and how people can access that funding, the Water Restoration Fund?
Yeah, well, there's an open bidding process for that. I'm very pleased that we were able to secure that. But I think the bidding process is concluded now.
We've actually just, I think, on about the 11th of March, we've just notified the successful bidders that their projects will be funded, and that's with the first tranche of the 11 million that we'd previously secured, which is taken from hypothecated water fines.
Yeah. And is it likely that fines in the future will go towards that?
So that's a discussion we will need to have with our Treasury colleagues as part of the spending review, but it was obviously really good news that the Treasury reconfirmed the principle of the existing funding round.
Very much. Samuel Wilson.
Hey, thank you, Chairman. I want to just have some questions on the circular economy. You announced the circular economy strategy in November. When do you intend to introduce it?
Circular economy plan? Yeah. Well, we've got a task force set up to work on developing our strategy for the circular economy. I mean, for me, I see this as a very important part of our agenda in government and certainly in DEFRA. By moving to a circular economy in the way that many of our global competitors are already doing in Europe and in North America, we stop falling behind. There are multinational companies, corporations, that are currently choosing to invest in Europe or North America rather than here because we don't have clarity on a regulatory roadmap towards circularity, towards eliminating waste. And because they don't know what our regulation might be in the future, they're choosing to invest in countries where that regulatory pathway is clearer. So the way that we are approaching developing the circular economy is the task force is going to engage with different sectors of the economy, one by one, and allow them to lead in the development of that regulatory roadmap so that investors and producers and consumers will know over a given period of time how regulation is going to change until we achieve circularity. The reasons for wanting to do this are manifold. One, we want that investment coming into our country rather than going into different countries. Two, it creates jobs and opportunities in regional economies right across the United Kingdom. That is something that is to be welcomed. It helps us achieve our net zero targets. It's something like 90% less carbon to reuse a metal like aluminium than to mine fresh and then import it into the country. And it gives us more secure supply chains. At a time when international supply chains are becoming visibly more volatile, these are materials that are already in the country, and my officials estimate a £16 billion per annum boost to the economy by moving to a circular economy. So there are so many reasons why this is the right thing to do.
How do you see the strategy which you're wanting to develop different from what we had previously?
Well, previously we had bits of paper that weren't being developed into anything in the real world. What we're doing is we put together a task force and we're engaging with sectors, and we're going to develop the regulatory roadmap. Strategies sitting on shelves wouldn't deliver anything. We have an agenda to move our economy to a circular economy for all of the beneficial reasons that I just outlined.
There's a degree of cynicism around all of this because of the stories that go around about waste which is collected, separated, and then finishes up in landfill, or waste which, especially stuff like electrical waste, etc., which we export to third world countries where all the dirty work is done and where all the problems, then environmental problems arise outside the kind of regulation that we would have in our own country. How do you see the strategy which you wish to develop avoiding those kinds of issues?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I recognise and share some of those feelings about how waste is dealt with now. That is why we need the investment in far better facilities that are able to identify and extract materials and then repurpose them so that they can be used again. In sectors as wide-ranging as construction, textiles, potentially chemicals as well. There's so much work that we can do to promote the move towards a circular economy, but making sure we have the right facilities to enable the work to happen is very important. We're taking concrete steps ahead of the task force. In any case, you'll have seen the work on a deposit return scheme. Recently went through Parliament. That gives us a much better approach to recycling and reusing drinks containers, which are one of the single biggest causes of litter and dump rubbish on our streets. We're also looking at extended producer responsibility as well on other forms of waste. I want to go to that in a moment to do it. Could I just press you on the strategy? It's not just a case of providing facilities. There's huge amounts of money to be made by criminal gangs and bad operators simply taking waste from this country and dumping it elsewhere. How do you see the strategy dealing with that kind of issue, which we know is an international problem, which causes huge environmental problems in other countries, while we kind of burnish our halos about being good environmentalists? Absolutely right, and not just in other countries, here as well. If you speak to rural communities and landowners in rural areas, they will tell you how much rubbish is being collected from domestic or construction sites and then just dumped on their land as well. So we need much tougher enforcement and stronger sanctions about that, and I'll have more to say about that in coming weeks.
Just come on to the deposit scheme. When do you see this coming into force in England?
It's due to come into force, DRS, in October 2027.
And I mean, there will be a cost to the consumer. And I think it is important, if we talk about the circular economy and the specific measures, that we be honest with people, that there are costs to this, whether it's in supermarkets dealing with packaging or drinks containers, etc. Do you intend in the strategy to spell out the costs to individuals of the kind of circularity which you're seeking to introduce?
Well, I mean, the principles behind this are prevention and polluter pays. And those are principles that were established through the EPPS, to which the previous government subscribed, as well as the current one. And there's been cost shunting, effectively, because it's left to local government to pay, and therefore the taxpayer, to pay to clean up the higher levels of litter that are on our streets as a result of not having this strategy in place. So my hope, my expectation, is this will reduce the amount of waste being dumped on our streets, and therefore overall reduce the cost to the consumer, who is also the taxpayer.
Just on the deposit scheme, given that there's already been, it's been stopped in Scotland, it's been interrupted in Scotland, Wales, there's been a judicial review against it. Northern Ireland is in a different situation as well because of EU regulations. Do you see the possibility of having a UK-wide scheme, or are we likely to find, because of the different circumstances in different countries of the UK, that we'll finish up with a fragmented one?
Yeah, I would very much like to get to a point where we had a single scheme across the whole UK. The Welsh Government have chosen to adopt a different approach, but we have a scheme that will now operate across England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. I think that's the right decision to have taken. For those countries, it's compliant with the Windsor framework, which is very important for Northern Ireland. We don't want to create barriers down the Irish Sea with different schemes in the north of Ireland from other parts of England, in particular, or mainland GB. So I think this was the right decision to come to, and it will work for those countries that have signed up to it. And it will work, I think, importantly as well, for manufacturers and retailers.
Thank you very much. Sarah Gibson.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about something very important to this committee, which of course is the cross-government working. And specifically, I wanted to know a little bit more about to what extent are you able to make the case in Cabinet and more widely for retaining the measures which protect nature and the environment, and do you think your voice is being heard? I have a couple of sort of fairly more specific questions, sort of starting firstly with the evidence of better policy outcomes for the environment because the EPPS is in place, and how well is the environmental principles policy statement being observed in DEFRA and across government? And I'm particularly concerned about budgets and a comment you made earlier about strategies that sit on shelves.
Yeah.
I have a major development project in my constituency led by the Environment Agency for regeneration of the river, which hits all the EPPS principles. And Emma Hardy, when she visited Chippenham during the floods, committed to this project, talked to the EA, thought it was wonderful. The funding is disappearing faster since the election than I have seen any funding disappear. And I'm really worried that the principles are going to sit on your desk or on somebody's shelf and we're not seeing it. How well do you feel you're defending?
That's a flood management scheme, is it? A flood?
It is,
flood scheme,
yes.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
removing a piece of infrastructure, an asset that is actually terrifyingly dangerous.
Right.
But even so, the funding is disappearing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't comment on a specific. Of course, I don't know the detail
but,
of it. But I'm glad Emma's been to see. But we have increased the amount of funding available for flooding. It's 2.65 billion now, I think, which is the highest it's ever been. And given that our flood defences were in the worst state on record at the election, I was really pleased that despite the hugely challenging financial situation we find ourselves in, that we're able to do that. I can't comment on the individual one, but of course I'm happy to speak with you offline. And it's important that Emma's been to see it and understands it as well. But in terms of working across government, I referred already, we have the EIP board. Mary Cray, as the Minister for Nature, is engaging with the ministers in other departments as well to make sure that nature is front and centre of the decisions that they are taking. Perhaps the best example of it is the Nature Restoration Fund. Now, there's a hard practical example of the government doing things differently, and that's working across government. The DBT, MHCLG and DEFRA in particular focused on that one, and DESNES as well to an extent. But what it means is that it allows us to move ahead faster with development, and we know we need that economic growth. We know we need those homes because we have a housing crisis and the economy is flatlined for over a decade. So we need that growth to happen, but it can't be at the expense of nature. So the developers will now be able to pay into a fund, the Nature Restoration Fund, and that will be spent on restoring nature across whole communities or landscapes where you have a much bigger impact on restoring species and restoring nature. So we move from a situation where we've had no economic growth, no housing development to speak of, and nature in decline, to a situation where we're not having those economic growth and nature competing with each other as if they're opposites. We can achieve both, a win-win for both.
I mean, the Nature Recovery Fund is in the planning bill, isn't it?
That's right, which we'll vote on later on.
As an ex-member of the Built Environment for the last 30 years, I will be commenting on that as a completion, but it's not part of this committee's questions. And I have my doubts as to how well that's going to deliver. But in terms of the OEP's recommendations, they've suggested amendments to the Environment Principal Policies so that it specifically refers to the Environment Act and the Environmental Improvement Plan targets. Do you think that's important? Is that something you'd support?
Well, we're going to respond to that by May of this year, so you won't have to wait long. But my colleagues won't be grateful if I spike their announcements by pre-announcing it here.
Okay, I'll leave you that. And slightly importantly to me, because is the Environment and Nature Bill's passage was paused, partly because the government gave a commitment to providing annual climate and nature statements in Parliament. Now, I know that Ed Miliband has committed to doing this, and is this an opportunity for joint statements? Do you support this commitment? And how do you expect that to be implemented?
Well, I know I was disappointed that it didn't proceed at that point, because we had been engaging as a department very closely with the sponsors of the bill. I'd like to see it succeed. There's probably one or two issues to iron out until they feel satisfied. But from my point of view, by and large, very much agreed with the proposals in the bill, and if it's not achieved that way, we'll find other ways to achieve it.
So just in answer to my question, the idea of an annual statement, the commitment to providing an annual statement on climate and the nature.
Well, there are conversations going on between my ministers and the sponsors of the bill, and I don't want to anticipate that here, but as I say, I wanted that bill to succeed.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to a quick one from Barry Garden, and then we'll go to Anna Gallagher.
I was interested in your response to my colleague Sarah Gibson when you said about the flood alleviation scheme that we're putting more into flood defence. You may know the committee's just come back from Holland, and it was very interesting to see the approach that they took there, where actually what they do is they specify the level of risk under their strategic plan that each area should have to bear, and then they deliver at national, regional and local level that level of risk no matter what the cost. Now, they're a country that is 40% below sea level. They have specific issues here. But it seems to me that it is a much more coherent approach that would address the local concerns of MPs, because obviously we fight for our own patch, but actually you need to take a nationwide view, and doing it in that way, specifying the level of risk that each should bear, is perhaps a better way of doing it than simply saying, oh yes, we're putting a bit of money more than the last lot did. And that has been the cry for decades.
I mean, there's a lot to be learnt from visiting other countries and seeing how they do it, particularly a country like Holland, the Netherlands, which has an awful lot of experience in these matters. The government, of course, is rolling out combined authorities and regional authorities across the country. So we need to be looking, as that happens, at how we can connect decision-making to more closely to local communities, and to catchments in particular, and not just in relation to flooding. You know, there's further for that to go. And I speak here as a lifelong believer in devolution.
Thank you. Anna Golders.
Come on.
I was just going to add, if I may, that the department does intend to consult around alternative approaches to flood funding. That will include options around how you might introduce a stronger local element in terms of the partnership arrangements about flood funding. I think precisely to address the point you're making about greater local prioritisation over flood defences. And some of our thinking has been informed by the Netherlands. I personally visited just before the general election, and so we have close connections, as does the Environment Agency, with our Dutch counterparts.
Thank you, and thanks for the input, very useful. And Secretary of State, we come to a topic that I raised with your department just last week, but it's always good to have further details heard by the committee. So when do you plan to commence Schedule 17 of the Environment Act on forest risk commodities?
Do you have the details on that yet?
No, we don't have a date yet for that, so that's something we're still working through.
Yeah, I thought we didn't, but when we have that, I'll make sure that you're informed.
That would be wonderful. Perhaps we could have some assurances that you'll be looking to do that ahead of the COP30 in Belém, which is a very important moment for international and national leadership on that issue.
That's right.
Great. Well, we look forward to appreciate your time and writing to us on that. I'd be interested to know if you're planning to bring it into force unamended, or if there are plans to revise it, for instance, to increase the scope of due diligence for some of these commodities.
Again, until we make the announcement, it's difficult for me to anticipate too much what's going to be in there. But you'll have seen, the government is very committed to this agenda, internationally as well as here in the UK. Mary Cray was in the west of England just last week, announcing the Western Forest, which is a fantastic initiative as well. So many reasons why we'd want to support this agenda here and overseas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you want to add something to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. There's a lot of detail to work through, but we remain kind of committed to the principles, and we'll hope to make an announcement as soon as we can about the exact path we'll take.
That's really good to hear, and we really welcome your engagement on that topic. There's plenty of Cornish rainforest that I would like to talk to you about.
I visited one, actually. Very interesting.
Yeah, good. Well, I look forward to talking about it. And in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that is going through at the moment, it places substantial additional responsibilities on Natural England. How will you be resourcing Natural England to undertake these new functions? Will you receive an overall increase in funding, or are you expecting to reprioritise resources?
Well, it'll operate on the basis of full cost recovery. So here there is a way that we can see where the resources will be coming from. We will have conversations with Natural England about the resourcing that they will need to make sure that this works in the way that it should. We don't want to create new log jams in decision making about development, and we don't want to hold back investment that is required to help nature to recover. We've gone on far too long with both the economy flatlining and nature in decline, and we can do better than that. So, as you would expect, working very closely with Tony Juniper and his team to make sure that the resourcing is appropriate. I think there's some seed funding going into getting things moving, but ultimately there will be full cost recovery here.
Yeah, so in the first phase of the spending review, which affects the next financial year, there was a total package of £70 million, not all of which is for Natural England. It includes our other regulators like the Marine Management Organisation, to support reforms to support planning and growth. £14 million of that is to prime the Nature Restoration Fund so that we can start putting in place the environmental mitigations ahead of development so that developers can come and buy back those credits later. Yep. So we eventually have a self-sustaining fund, but we will be putting in that pump priming funding to get it moving as quickly as possible.
And so, Secretary of State, do you believe you're prioritising sufficient funding for those environmental regulators and for environmental protection work within local authorities and within Natural England, as we've already mentioned, who are facing at least up to 200 job cuts?
Yes, I do. You know, the whole of government needs to look at how we can do better with less. When I was 16 years in business in the private sector. And every year I was expected to do better with less. That means being innovative, open to new approaches, changing the way that we did things, always focus on the outcome that you're trying to deliver. And I really don't see why exactly those same rigours shouldn't apply to the public sector as well. But of course, we'll work with the regulators. As I say, I've got this review that I'll be announcing in due course in fairly short order that will have more to say about how we can streamline our approaches, eliminate duplication, eliminate crossover, and make the system work better for the outcomes we all want to see.
Yeah, I think the committee always appreciates a yes or no answer, and we look forward to engaging with you as those plans come forward. The review required departments to identify biodiversity as well as carbon benefits within the process of the spending review. Did DEFRA do its own appraisal of the monetary value of those environmental benefits to be delivered through its own policies, and did you help other departments to do the same calculations in theirs?
So our own spending review submissions, we do absolutely carry out kind of full impact assessments, value for money assessments, and where we can, we monetise the benefits of biodiversity, of climate change. There are always some benefits in there that we can't monetise, and we do make sure that we try to include those as well as those. And we do, as part of our network of analysts across government, we do provide advice and guidance to other departments on how they can do the same.
Here. And the Treasury has said that the spending review will prioritise delivering the government's missions. Secretary of State, are you concerned that nature does not feature in the remit of any of those 5 mission boards?
Well, nature underpins everything we do, and it's present in all of the missions. And I'm engaging with my colleagues across government on precisely that basis. You know, whether it's the crime mission, access to nature. Diversionary projects taking place in nature, the opportunities mission, the opportunities for voluntary work, for employment pathways into employment, building it into the education experience of children as well. It's present in everything we do, and without nature, none of us would be here. So it's fair to say it underpins the missions, just like it underpins everything else about our civilization.
So you'd say it's definitely a priority for this government?
100%, yes. I mean, I've written pieces before explaining how it fits into all the missions as well, which I'd be very happy to send you if you wanted to see it.
Yeah. I think we would be very welcome that. And finally, can you confirm that protecting nature and meeting our environmental targets within the Environmental Land Management Scheme, how will the government ensure success without the stability of ELM funding schemes? Is it still a priority for you and your department?
No, absolutely, it's a priority, and there is stability in the environmental land management schemes. What's happened with SFI is the previous government was criticised by the farming sector for not getting over £300 million of allocated funding out the door. So it was allocated in the budget for farming, but it was never given to farmers, and therefore it was never spent, and therefore we never got the environmental benefits from the work that it could have been carrying out. Now, they didn't get the money out the door. I was determined we would get the money out of the door, and we did. So we've successfully allocated SFI for this year. Once the budget is used up, it has to be paused because you can't keep spending money that doesn't exist. But all of the activities continue because we've got, 37,000 agreements, I think, in place now. Over half of all farmed land is in a scheme. Those are in contracts that are multi-year contracts, so they continue to be paid despite the pause in new applications, and they will continue to carry out actions that will be improving nature. We should see this as a good thing that we got the money out of the door. There will now be a pause until after the spending review. Then we'll be able to announce when the new scheme will be opened. As part of the farming roadmap, we can engage with the sector. Now the budget is fully allocated, which hadn't been the case previously. We'll need to look at what is the best way to make sure that those who need the money the most get it. So we'll speak with the farming sector to make sure that that is achieved.
Thank you.
Very much. Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, I should have been better prepared then. Minister, the government seems to be betting the economy on growth. To what extent are your department's environmental protection policies seen by the government to be blocking the path to growth?
Yeah, well, I mean, growth's essential, isn't it? Because if we don't, the economy's flatlined for well over a decade now, and if we don't grow the economy, we don't get the revenues to reinvest in our broken public services, and the British people won't get the pay rise that they so desperately need after 10 years of having their incomes flatlining as well. So growth is an essential. It's the primary mission of the whole government. DEFRA, as part of the government, is playing our part in making sure that growth can go ahead. I think the comments you repeated then about how DEFRA was seen are true of the past. DEFRA was seen as a blocker and not an enabler to growth. But the actions that we've taken since the general election have started to turn that around. So, in particular, the reform, the review I've commissioned from Dan Corrie into regulation, DEFRA's regulators, are intended to review whether or not they are enabling or blocking economic growth. And he's made his recommendations. We're still assessing those, but I'll be making an announcement very, very soon. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, where she made her intervention on better regulation a week or so ago, included some of the proposals that Dan Corrie came up with, one of which was appointing a lead regulator for bigger and more complex projects, so that instead of the developer having to navigate this complex architecture of regulation, there will be one lead regulator that will do it for them, and that makes the life of the developer easier. I think that's a very sensible approach to streamlining how regulation works. The second one, and the Chancellor referred to this as well, is that where you've got organisations that have a high degree of public trust on nature, organisations like the National Trust or the RSPB, then there will be a degree of earned autonomy over the applications that they would be putting forwards, so they don't have to go through the same process as everybody else. You can take a large proportion of applications for consent out of DEFRA's regulatory system that way, and therefore speed up the process for everybody else. The other point I'll make here is DEFRA is responsible for £104 billion worth of private sector investments that will be coming into the water sector over the next 5 years, starting on the 1st of April this year. That is the single biggest investment ever into the water sector, but it's also the second biggest private sector investment into any part of the economy over the lifetime of this Parliament, creating jobs and opportunities directly all across the country, but enabling growth and development in every part of the country as well. So with all of that, DEFRA is absolutely a department that is enabling growth.
Thank you. You mentioned streamlining for developers. My constituents in Tewkesbury might be concerned at that type of language, that actually what we might end up with is what we've had for the last 10 to 20 years, which are these piecemeal developments, all about the constituency with very little oversight and ability to plan that from the local authority. And what would you say to them?
Streamline doesn't mean weaken. I mean, if you look at what's been going on up until now, we've had a flatlining economy and nature in retreat. So it hasn't worked for economic growth, and it hasn't worked for nature, the old system, failing everywhere. Our intention is to streamline regulation but maintain the environmental standards so that we can both see the economic growth, the new homes that people in this country desperately want to see, but also have a means to finally turn the corner on nature's decline and on species decline. I think half of our bird species are at risk of domestic extinction, a third of our mammal species. We just can't go on like that. You know, we've taken some steps towards that already, like banning pesticides, bee-killing pesticides, for instance, with no more opt-outs, reintroducing species like beavers. But in terms of regulation, we can do far better than both the economy and nature in decline. So the intention of things like the Nature Restoration Fund, which is part of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill going through today, is that it creates a sort of fund of money that can be spent on improving nature at scale across whole landscapes or whole communities, rather than doing it bat by bat in a way that failed in the past.
A lot of industry professionals have concerns that planning reforms are going to have an impact both on jobs across the sector and across regulations. What would you say to them?
It'll have a huge impact. It'll. I mean, if I had a conversation with the guy from the US State Department who was responsible for the new US embassy being built in the Nine Elms area, and he'd been there for decades, and he'd built new US embassies in countries all over the world. And he said the level of red tape and delay in the UK was unparalleled anywhere other than in Rome and Baghdad, in his experience. And we need to be at the top of that table, not at the bottom of it, because we need to be bringing in international investment into this country and enabling development to happen. But we won't do it at the expense of nature. We'll do it in a way that allows nature to start to recover.
If I could just add to that, I mean, I've sort of seen some of the concerns raised about, you know, for example, sort of implications for ecologists. There's a massive shortage of ecologists. I think what we're looking to do in some of these reforms, and they were prefigured in the regulation plan published last week, is actually sort of, if we can reduce the focus of some of our expert bodies on relatively low risk activities, relatively low risk permitting or licensing activities, you can actually release some of that expert resource to focus on projects that have much higher environmental value, intrinsic value. So really the reforms are about, they're not about reducing standards, they're actually about focusing expertise where it has maximum environmental benefit, and that will lie behind some of the consultation we'll bring forward on reforms to exemptions from environmental permitting, for example.
Thank you. It's already been mentioned, but the EAC recently visited the Netherlands, where it was highlighted, the benefits of long-term and joined-up planning, where sustainability and future-proofing are central to the usage of the land. Yeah. In Rotterdam, we went up a 3-storey structure, and you have orchards, you have allotments, you have green spaces, producing food, improving mental health, and helping to manage water. Mr. Hill, you stated that there's a dedicated unit working jointly between DEFRA and the Department for Transport. That's fantastic. What work is DEFRA doing alongside the Department for Health and Social Care and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government to innovate appropriately, not just for 2030, but to 2050?
Yeah, well, my colleagues may have other things to add, but I'm working very closely with the Department for Health as well. On, for instance, the food strategy. That's something we're putting together a ministerial group that will be setting up a task force involving all appropriate stakeholders so that we can develop a food strategy. That obviously is of huge interest to the Department of Health, because each year in this country, there was a report published just over a year ago, each new year of kids are getting, in relative terms, shorter, fatter and sicker than the year before, and a large part of that is because they're eating bad calories rather than more nutritious calories. We have a bad food strategy in this country because it's entirely randomised. We want to sit down with all stakeholders, including retailers, including producers, consumers as well, to look at how we can give parents in particular better information to inform better choices about what is the best things to give their kids to eat. And there are many, many changes that we can make there. So there's one area where you couldn't do anything if you just did it in one department. You have to work cross-departmentally. And it's not just with the Department of Health in this case, it's also the Department for Business and Trade, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and the Department for Education, as well as DEFRA.
Yeah, it's that joined upness that works so well in the Netherlands. So is there a plan for DEFRA to get around the table with those departments and have that discussion about
we've already started it. Yeah, we've already started doing it. Yep.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right, a quick one from Sarah Gibson, I think.
Sorry, just to, I mentioned before, I have certain concerns about the Nature Restoration Fund, and having spent 30 years as an architect and working in the built environment, most of my SME developers that I've spoken to over the last few months about this are very worried that they are quite happy to deliver on site. In fact, it helps enormously with public buy-in to their projects. They're also very happy, they're very concerned about losing the biodiversity net gain options, because actually they find that hugely positive. And if we are going to build 1.5 million houses, certainly in rural constituencies like mine, the first thing you need is buy-in from your local population. If you start taking that restoration or the biodiversity or the nature gain and move it even to the 3 villages away, you will suddenly get massive amounts of resistance, because 3 villages away in rural England is the other side of the country. So I think lots of my SME developers in the constituency have serious concerns about the fact that this will work for your volume house builder, which, like all of the NPPF revisions and the same as this, clearly the government has spoken to the volume house builder and not to the SMEs. So I think some more consultation with them would be helpful on that.
Well, we are consulting very widely on this, and I'm sure Mike is who's speaking in the debate, but my colleague Matt Pennycook, I'm sure will have an awful lot to say on this, and you'll have a chance to grill him in the chamber as well. But what we've had so far has failed everyone. You know, it's failed developers, it's failed people who want somewhere affordable to live, and it's failed nature. We've had a flatlining economy and nature in decline now for decades. And we can do better than that. So the approach we're taking, we're not giving up on BNG. That we remain committed to that. But I think it is far better than just doing everything site by site, to create a fund that can be used by Natural England to fund nature restoration and species recovery at scale across whole landscapes, because it's the interconnectedness of these pieces of nature that allows species to thrive.
Well, in an urban context. You live in a rural community where there are no buses. You cannot get out of your housing estate. And if your housing estate is the one where the new wonderful forest is 15 miles away, it might as well be on Mars.
Yeah, well,
so, in principle, and yes, it works for urban conurbations, but this in the rural environment isn't going to deliver.
This will absolutely have to work for rural communities as well, and we've set up a rural task force bringing together a whole range of stakeholders from the sector and across government to make sure that happens. But what's needed there is investment in appropriate infrastructure, and I'm sure there will be more announcements made over coming days as well as coming months about that, because we all feel the same way that you do about the importance of allowing rural communities to thrive just as much as anywhere else.
And just to clarify, Secretary of State, when you were talking about the failure of the past, you weren't referring to biodiversity net gain, which is a relatively recent approach. You're talking about longer term.
Generally, it's just, I mean, if you're looking at the economy is flatlined for over a decade, and nature has still been in retreat. So clearly, the approaches that were being taken weren't.
You weren't when you were talking about failure. You weren't talking about biodiversity net gain. No, thank you, Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to ask some questions in relation to COP16.
Yeah.
Did you expect the COP16 conference to deliver more on biodiversity and the environment than it did?
Well, I guess it's the same with any international gathering of that kind. You always hope it will deliver the max. The reality is, in tough negotiations, compromises inevitably have to be made. But I thought what was very positive was the leading role that the UK played at COP16. I mean, I lost count of the number of times that representatives from other countries came up to me and said it's good to see the UK back, because they felt, other members of the committee were there too, they felt the UK hadn't been playing its role, its potential role as a global leader. And the UK played a really big role in the negotiations, particularly around digital sequence information. Didn't quite get over the line in Cali, but it did subsequently in Rome. And now the Cali Fund has been established, and work needs to be continued to ensure that we get resources into that fund. But I think it's inevitable. International conferences, no one ever gets everything they want.
And in terms of commitments from countries with regard to 30 by 30, are you concerned that so few are actually have signed up to that and have plans in place to deliver that?
Well, again, I could be concerned about what they're doing, and we can use our relationships to try and encourage them to do better as we would see it, but it's not within my gift to make them. What I'm responsible for as part of this government is making sure our government meets its commitments, and we remain committed to 30 by 30. There will be very stretching targets in the EIP, but that will give us at least an insight into the means by which we intend to get there. And good as well, I think, that we have committed to the NBSAP targets, all 23 of them. So I do feel that the UK is playing its role despite the very difficult circumstances financially that we find ourselves in.
And in terms of the UK's role, and in terms of the National Biodiversity Strategy and the Action Plan, I think rightly in terms of it's very much outcome-based, but where does that leave you in terms of your ability to report with regards to, because some of these outcomes will take time to materialise, even if you're going in the right direction. How then do you report on that in terms of updates, this committee or anybody else, in terms of how you're progressing?
Yeah, do you have a view, Sally?
Well, I think one of the key things, obviously we wanted to get the NBSAP out in order to meet an international obligation, but that means that it has prefigured the environmental improvement plan, and much of that detail about how we will be delivering, including how we'll be tracking and monitoring that, will be contained in the EIP. So obviously we'll need to report against the NBSAP separately, but once you have the EIP later this year, you'll find much more of the substance about the how and about the tracking and the monitoring will be in there, and they'll have to work very closely together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Secretary of State, no one could accuse you of not being on message when it comes to the need for your department to do better with less. I'm told by those who are watching these things that it's been noted by people watching this session. But it's been reported that you've used this session to sort of tell the sector that they're going to have less money coming out of the spending review because the NHS and house building needs it. Can you give us assurance to the sector that you are also nature's voice in the Cabinet, fighting for more money in the way that we've successfully seen Ed Miliband do, for example, in his department, not just the Cabinet's voice to the sector, telling them they're going to have to do more with less?
I mean, doing more with less is not a prediction of the spending review, just to be absolutely crystal clear about that. It's what any organisation should always seek to do with its resources. Because if you just rest on your laurels, you go backwards. We should always be looking for better value for every single penny that we ask taxpayers to hand. Always. That's an absolute for me. So, even if money was unlimited, I'll be pushing hard to do better with less. Money's not unlimited. In terms of within Cabinet, I think the fact that we've got the Nature Restoration Fund in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is an outcome of the fact that I push very hard for nature in Cabinet, but with my colleagues across government as well. The fact that when the Chancellor announced better regulation a week or so ago, I forget precisely when, there was a big element in that which came from a review commissioned by DEFRA to streamline regulation, but importantly, not to weaken environmental standards. You'll recall the previous government approach to building in areas where there was high levels of water pollution was to, nutrient neutrality, was to seek to weaken environmental standards. We won't do that. We're maintaining environmental standards, and we will find better ways to allow the growth to go ahead, but also not just protect nature, but help nature to restore itself and to recover. The approach I've taken with the EIP is to invite the campaign organisations, the ENGOs, the other stakeholders into the department and work with us on shaping how it's going to work in future. So this isn't about in any way a loss for nature versus a win for growth. This is win-win for both, because we could do far better than the previous government that flatlined the economy and did nothing to help nature restore. We could do both.
Thank you very much. Well, Secretary of State, Ms Randall, Mr Hill, thank you very much for the evidence we've heard today and for your support. This sitting is suspended. Order.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.